this video, we're going to talk about the V-cams and how to adjust your tension to ensure your project is the size that you want. We're going to start by looking at this gauge swatch, this tension swatch, and you'll see I have 3 sections. Each one is 50 rows. Okay, up until here is 50 rows. And yet look how much different they are in size. Now let's look at this biggest section compared to this little section. So first let's look at how long they are. This one goes from here all the way up to here is where the 50 rows stop. Look, it's almost 1.5 inches different just because of the difference in the V-cams. You can also notice if we line up these two sides, look how much thinner this section is, this tube is, compared to this one. And again, the only difference here is where the V-cams were. Same yarn, same everything else. It's just the V-cam height. So the V-cam and the tension on your yarn can really have a significant impact on your project. You use both the side knob and the top knob to adjust your V-cam height. You start by loosening the side knob. Both knobs are lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. I loosen the side knob. As I loosen the top knob, turn it to the left, you'll see the block is going down in the window. The farther down it is, the looser your tension will be, the longer your stitches will be. If I go back to the right, the tighter my stitches are, the shorter they are. And you can't actually go all the way to the bottom or all the way to the top. When you're going up toward the top, the thing to watch is you need to make sure the top of the needles do not come up above the top of the V-cam, the top of the cylinder at the lowest point, because the stitches won't knit. I usually end up keeping my V-cam right in the middle, and we'll talk about that in a minute, how to make sure you get the right tension for your specific yarn. Once you have it the height that you want, then you tighten this side knob, make sure it's nice and tight, because otherwise as you knit, the pressure of the needles traveling under the V-cam can start to push your V-cam up. This side knob is what keeps that from happening. You know that your V-cams are too tight, your tension in general is too tight. If, for example, the stitches start riding up on the needles, or if they really start jumping off right around here, if they can't knit, often that's because the tension is too tight. Also, as you have tighter tensions, you raise the V-cams, it's often helpful to switch out your weight. I have a medium-sized weight in here now, but I could switch it for the larger weight if I was really going to have the V-cams up high, and that will help the stitches form. You can't move, at the other extreme, you can't have the V-cam so low that the cylinder can't turn. Right, so it's possible to have the V-cams so low that they're actually pushing the needles into the track where they ride along the bottom, and you won't be able to turn the cylinder at all. So there is a sweet spot in the middle, and you will start to figure that out with your machine. Another thing that can really impact your tension is how much pull there is on your yarn. And if sometimes the cone is wound so that the yarn just very effortlessly feeds into the cylinder, no problem. I tend to keep my hand here just resting, not always helping, but just resting to make sure it doesn't start to feel tight. Like right there, I can actually feel it starting to get tight. It's a little bit caught on my cone. So if I'm not careful, the tension could get too much right on those stitches and I could lose some stitches. So when that happens, I kind of get in the habit of pulling out the yarn as I'm cranking, and then I just let it come all the way back with hardly any tension on it at all. If in doubt, less tension is better on the yarn when knitting with your circular sock machine. When I am getting ready to knit with a new yarn, the first thing to do is to adjust my tension. And I usually start with the V-cams pretty low, and I'll crank a few rows and then increase it a little bit, crank a few rows, increase it a little bit, and you get used to how you like the look of your fabric when it's inside the cylinder. At some point, you will pass a point where the tension is too tight. Your stitches will be riding up the needles, they'll be jumping off right here where the V-cam is actually knitting, or it will simply look too tight for you. At that point, you back it down a little bit, and that's really as tight as your tension could be for that particular yarn. Even after you know where your maximum tension settings are for your particular yarn, you also will still then have quite a bit of variation for exactly how tight you want your stitches to be. So if we return to this sample, for example, this is very beautiful fabric. This is also very beautiful fabric. It's not quite as stretchy maybe, the stitches are a little bit tighter, but depending on what you're making, either one of those would be perfectly acceptable. Same thing with this one. This is much tighter, but maybe that's just fine. Maybe that's the best thing for your particular project. So you start by finding where the edge is, and then you can back it off until it's how you'd like. This is actually a great project for you to try. You don't have to do these cuff ends. You can just start with waste yarn, start with a low V-cam, maybe 2/3 down the window, crank 50 rows, add a row of waste yarn, move your tension block, your V-cam block into the middle of the window, crank 50 rows, add a row of waste yarn, and then again, move your V-cam up a little bit more, maybe so that it's, you know, a third down from the top, and crank another 50 rows, add some more waste yarn, take it off, and compare for yourself. Over time, you'll get a sense of how to adjust the V-cams the way you like. My final note is that on any particular project, before I start a sock, I would always knit a little tube like this, a little 50-row tube, just to test and make sure the tension is how I want. If it's for a sock, I also test the diameter to make sure that it's the width of the tube is like I want. And Dina Bean machines are all made so that you can take the yarn off without having to cut it. You can take it off of the yarn mast, you can take it off of the yarn feeder very easily. And so you'll be able to take the whole project out, measure your swatch like this, like I showed you, measure your swatch, and then rewind that yarn and use it again. You never have to cut the yarn in order to get it off of the machine. Last thing is that once you're happy with your gauge swatch and you've taken it off the machine, you've measured it, it's great. You maybe have done that a couple of times, so you've really dialed in the V-cam, it's exactly like you want. If you're going to be doing a project where you're turning the cylinder both directions, you need to make sure this cylinder is set at the same height. So as you're cranking clockwise, this is the V-cam that is adjusting your stitch size. But when you're cranking counterclockwise, it's this one. So for example, if you're knitting toes or heels, both of the V-cams need to be at the same height. That's really everything you need to know about tension. I encourage you to make your very own tension gauge swatch and learn more about how the V-cams work. Happy knitting! Visit us at deanandbean.com and please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.